Welcome back to the Mold Safe Home Build channel. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking to two of the owners and contributors to Magis Homes, a company that's building safe, healthy homes, especially for those who have CIRS, multiple chemical sensitivity, or EMF sensitivities. And I had the pleasure to speak to Shannon just a little while ago about how they're building these homes so that they are safe for those with environmental sensitivities. And I was thrilled when I heard some of the choices that they are making to prevent mold, to minimize VOCs and EMFs in their homes. And they're actually making a lot of the same choices that I'm making in my own home build, but they are making this easy for other people who are trying to build a home. And that's what I love about what they're doing because I'm figuring it all out on my own and they already have it all figured out for someone who wants to build a home. So welcome to the channel, Shannon Harris, and this is Josh Krayenhoff. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, good. So can you guys start by telling us a little bit about who you are and your roles in Magis Homes?
Yeah, it's Magis Homes. So I'm Shannon. I've had a 15-year plus career in interior design. I've always been really keen on healthy home development and interior finishings. Have done many different project types within the world of healthy homes, and that was from like sustainable new builds all the way to, what I call the stylized fluffy stuff. So that's art, furniture, accessories, kind of everything needed to create a home. And then also on our team, there's four of us that are owners of Magis. And also on our team, I'll introduce NK. Andrea Keller is our architect. And she is many decades in the architectural industry, a lot of work in California, understands really, stringent standards of building out there, but also gets into things like healing powers of sacred geometries and really keen on proportions of space and flow of space and really developing top tier buildings for human optimization in your structures.
Hmm.
I'll let Joss introduce our himself and then
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Joss Krayenhoff, obviously one of the other partners. I come from a background as a design build general contractor, and then from the owner of Firewall in the United States. So Firewall is a rammed earth wall system that we train and consult on projects, institutional, commercial, residential. So it's a very healthy product that's perfect for this type of world. But I also come from that design build background, which is really useful. In that world, our specialty was working with people who had health issues, and that's dating back to the late 90s or mid 90s, where these issues were less known. But working through with them, whether it's multiple chemical sensitivities or Lyme's disease or severe asthma or other autoimmune issues. And we developed an approach from the 90s through the 2000s and have refined that with Magis today. So that's really where my background comes in. And then Michael Palethorpe, our other partner, comes from a construction background. He's Australian, and nobody is more driven than Michael. So Michael will always keep a ship moving in the right direction and is an endless fountain of energy. So he comes from that construction background, but he's the driving force in a lot of ways.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit more about the motivation. Who was like, I want to form this company and help these specific people have healthy homes? Where did that come from? And why did you decide to band together to do this?
So I'll start, and then because it started before you, Shannon, and then once you come in, then I'll let you jump in. So in 2017, we were contacted by a doctor, Dr. Scott McMahon, who is a CIRS doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out, we were meeting as a group of people looking at how to make a difference to people on the planet. We've always been people that don't accept how things currently are. We want to create something that's better and what's the best possible. So when Scott contacted us and said, I think you guys are our ideal solution, you're what I've been looking for. We got together, we went to Kansas City, had a great weekend. And from that, I began to understand the impacts of the CIRS community and what they were dealing with, which was a huge unknown for us. We'd been working with a lot of multiple chemical sensitivities, Lyme's disease, but not SIRS was a new term. So from there, we weren't fully focused on health yet at that point. We were looking at how can we create the best buildings that we can on the planet, and trying to take a very holistic view. What's the best from an environmental perspective, from a human experience, best for food supply? How should we live as communities? Really broad. And that's where Shannon came in that conversation. And as that refined, the four of us, Michael, aka Shannon, and I, split off and formed Magis as fully focused on the health, because there's such a demanding need, and it's always been our key passion, is having that impact on people where you can transform their lives. There's not a way that I know where I can have a bigger impact on humanity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the home is the heart of everything about your life, right? So if it's a healthy home, you're going to have a much better life than if you have a horrible toxic home. I know that from personal experience. So, all right. So, is there anything else you want to say about how Magis came to be or what it's about before I start asking you about your homes and how you're building them?
Yeah, I'll just chime in a little bit and kind of continue where Joss left off. So, I think we were all meeting as a group for a good while, like you mentioned, to create that best building. And I think what was cool out of that, which we've definitely brought into Magis, which ironically or not ironically, kind of in an aligned way, STIRS people deal with this a lot too, is it's more than just the building and the physical health that we talk about non-toxic, and we talk about, material content and things like that. But what we've done and what we've really done a lot around is just, a spiritual sense of being home. And that's kind of where I mentioned AK's proportions and just how we, like, all of our kind of intrinsic physiological systems are affected as well. And so we really take that holistic, human approach to, it's not just the building, it's how we're actually flowing through the space, how we're actually inhabiting the space. It's function, it's spiritual, it's connected. There's a certain frequency of the space that we develop in our model homes, and it goes definitely beyond the structure and into, what it really means to be human and living. So
Mhm.
and I think that's the alignment of, we all felt that human side of what otherwise would be sustainability or healthy for the planet. Like, the four of us really aligned on creating the best for humans and having that be our major focus output.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I can't remember the term you used, Shannon, but you used some term that essentially was speaking to how a home can make your nervous system feel.
Neuroaesthetics. So
Yes.
writes off, and he does a lot of studying on neuroaesthetic work as well. And so part of what she does is the fractal geometry, and so that's really connecting back to nature and natural patterns, and that's a whole side topic. But yeah, it's basically our bodies respond based on what our sensory environment is getting to us. So that's where materials really matter, palettes really matter, the weight of an object really matters, because we're perceiving that internally, just intrinsically, a very specific way, and that's just how we're wired for evolution. So yeah, there's a lot of those kind of periphery considerations on nervous system functioning, which I know is huge for service patients, and there's a lot that's been considered as well in how we develop.
Yeah. I love that. I think that is extremely important for all three of these populations. Actually, almost all of them have very dysregulated nervous systems, and as a result, they're incredibly impacted, not just by are there toxins in the environment, but how does that environment make them feel in terms of, does it make them feel safer and calmer? Is it overstimulating, or is it very regulating in all kinds of ways in terms of how sound moves in the space and the colors, like you were saying, and how it flows? I think there are many aspects to that I honestly haven't put a ton of thought into, but I've been into particularly one building, which was a rammed earth building. I went there on my honeymoon, and I could not believe, and my husband actually commented on it too, and he doesn't have a background of chronic illness or nervous system issues at all, but he was like, I feel so good in this space like I have never felt in a space before. And I think that it was all of those things. It was the materials used. It was actually partly the rammed earth and the concrete floors and those kinds of things. But I think it was also these beautiful earth tones of the building. I think it was the fact of how sound was deadened as opposed to bouncing around the space. And so many other factors, the way the space flowed as well. It was very open and airy and lots of light coming in. I think there were a lot of aspects to it, but that was one of those experiences I had in life where I was like, "Oh, wow. I think I know exactly what Shannon is talking about in retrospect as I reflect on that experience."
That's a perfect example. And the opposite side of that, one of my father's favorite quotes is from Frank Lloyd Wright.
Mhm.
And it's not a famous quote, but one of the things he said was, he was confident he could design, I'm paraphrasing, he was confident that he could design a home that would cause a happily married couple to divorce within a year. And what he was pointing at was the opposite of what we're creating here. And
Yeah.
he went on to describe how he would do that. And he described our modern day apartment building complexes when those didn't exist yet.
Oh, wow.
Uh, but he talked about narrow hallways, flat ceilings, the lighting that he would have inside the space, the transition between the kitchen and the living space, and that transition wouldn't exist. And he described how the large majority of us live today. So
Yeah.
we've gone so far in the other direction
Yep.
that there are so many avenues for improvement,
Yeah,
and that's what AK and Shannon are expert in, and what your experience was that you were referring to in that home. Uh,
totally. Yeah. I would say that the contrast is the fluorescent lighting and lots of metallic, shiny surfaces and all
yeah.
kinds of things that we do today that don't actually make people feel good.
Oh, and he
So,
talked about sound. He talked about a lot of the things that you just talked about in describing that experience you had.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's so interesting. Okay. Well, let's get into some of the things that you guys are doing for specifically these highly sensitive people, unrelated to nervous system, more related to mold prevention and things like that. So, can you talk to us about some of the major considerations you're making in these homes to prevent mold from becoming a problem in them?
yeah. So we're approaching the problem differently than the rest of the industry. The
Mhm.
rest of the industry is looking at our current housing stock and how to make those buildings perform in a way that doesn't impact your health. But you're dealing with products that don't absorb humidity, don't moderate the humidity in the space,
Mm.
and all organic materials decompose, and that decomposition occurs through mold, rot, things that are very poor for everyone's health, but specifically people suffering from SIRS. So our approach is build with inorganic materials, especially in the building envelope.
Mm.
So when I talk about a building envelope, that's a term not everyone knows, but that means everything that's touching both inside and outside.
Mhm.
That's your building envelope. So if you have anything that's touching outside air and inside air, so that's the exterior wall, which in a typical building is your vinyl siding and your vapor barrier and your insulation and your wood studs and your drywall on the inside and your paint. That's where your envelope lives. If that's inorganic and there's nothing in that can mold, inorganic materials don't mold.
Mm.
They decompose through rocks, decompose through water, eroding them over time, or shifts. That's how inorganic materials decompose.
Mm.
So that is a much healthier environment for everyone, but specifically for those with SIRS. So that's step one. Remove things that can negatively impact our environment or your health, and especially where that water transfer can come, which is your roof, your walls, your floor.
Yeah.
If you want to put wood staircase like I have behind me, or wood is a beautiful product. And if you put it in an environment where it's in a controlled humidity environment, it's a safe material to be around. So that's step one,
Mhm.
is humidity. Another piece of that humidity is we have something called a humidity flywheel. So when you build with mass buildings, and this brick is another example of this, but humidity will absorb into something that has a little bit of a porous material and mass, and it will regulate the humidity inside that space. So when we take data loggers that are measuring humidity, and I live in the same climate as Seattle, in between Seattle and Vancouver in Canada, and through the middle of winter, we have data loggers outside and inside in our places, and they're showing that humidity going up 1%, 2%, back down 1%. Outside, we're going up to 100% relative humidity, 90 down to 30, up to 90, and our graph is doing spikes. Inside, it's staying constant at a climate where mold can't grow.
Mhm.
So by moderating that humidity, you've done 90% of the work. That's key.
Yeah.
Then you're dealing with things that can occur inside the space. So inside the space is things like sinks, plumbing, bathrooms. Are you creating any microclimates? So cabinets are horrible for microclimates where mold can grow. Closets.
HVAC systems, they
Yeah.
also let the flux run, so none of that where dust and force could potentially get trapped.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So then it's just approaching how do we approach those interior issues? But the main piece, we're 90% there just by changing the way that an exterior wall in a building is viewed.
Mhm.
Anything you want to add or any questions on that piece, Karen?
Yeah. So you're doing rammed earth walls that I think have a layer of insulation built into them, right? So that's your mass wall system that's moderating humidity for you. That's incredible, actually, that you're seeing that the indoor humidity, even in that, I think it's considered a temperate rainforest climate, is not jumping above 50% or so that we need to keep mold from growing. So that's pretty amazing. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that from Shannon.
And it wasn't intentional. What we were trying to measure was BCIT, which is the BC Institute of Technology, was putting data loggers on our buildings.
Okay.
And they were measuring temperature and looking at how much temperature, basically free heat, we were getting through the winter. That was the
Through the thermal
analysis they
mass
were looking
effect.
for. Yeah.
Yeah.
But those data loggers also tracked humidity. And that wasn't even the intention of the research project. It was a complete accident.
Wow.
And we saw these humidity staying stagnant inside the environment. And it, yeah, very exciting, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible because I used to live in Portland, Oregon, so I know the climate very well. And when I started monitoring humidity, once I realized mold was a problem for my own health, yeah, I would see these huge swings in humidity inside my house, and dehumidification was absolutely necessary in the winter. And of course, that was a traditional stick-built home, so very different.
Yeah, and there's other considerations there that need to be taken into account. So what's the volume of air in the space has a huge impact on how much humidity there is and whether the mass is able to control that on its own or whether you also need some kind of dehumidification.
Mm.
If you're in a place like I'm in currently, where I'm in a 200 square foot place, there's not enough air for that humidity to be controlled without dehumidification. So I still see very slow changes in my humidity that I'm able to adapt to, but it's not the same as if you were in a larger space. That air is a key component in controlling humidity as well.
Okay, interesting.
So there's more complexity to it, but
Yeah, yeah. But using this different material is a good start because, like you said, it can moderate that humidity, unlike a traditional wall system can. So,
Right.
as far as I remember from what Shannon was saying, you guys are also not even using stick framing on interior walls, not using traditional cabinetry. Like you're going inorganic with all of those too, right?
Yeah, we're kind of saying what is the most stringent we need to be to serve the SIRS community, right? And everybody, as you may or may not know, has a little bit of different sensitivities or levels of sensitivity, and as you go through recovery and things like that. So somebody might choose to do something different. What we're presenting and what we've really chased down over the last number of years was what is the absolute safest solution that we can provide for the sickest person, and what we run with as our baseline.
Yeah.
And so and a lot of it is we'll talk about like inventing systems and things like that, but it's the invention really is how we're putting the components together. So a lot of it too is going back to, Red Earth is an ancient technology, and our cabinet storage is really just a way of storing things that we need to utilize for functions of kitchens, right? It's like, let's remove the cabinet boxes. We're framing up with cinder blocks. To your point of interior walls, we're going to use block framing and plaster finish. And so also in the kitchen, that's framing out those areas and using the drawer glides and things like that right on the framed walls and almost like a niche, right? And then we can cover that with doors still, but just eliminating the parts and pieces that are the biggest hiccups from if there ever was a leak. And cabinetry is, there are no good, safe, healthy options. I mean, you could go to solid wood, but a lot of times still just the way they're made, you'll have your glued pieces together and it's the glues and the dyes and he said they're just so toxically bad. And so we just don't. And I think that's the sort of out of box thinking that we've come to in the last 5 years of really dissecting every single avenue of just eliminating. And, it might seem a little bit untraditional, but it's not anything that hadn't been done before.
Yeah, actually, when you told me about your solution for cabinets, I was floored. I was like, "Oh my god, why didn't I think of that?" I was chasing down metal cabinetry, but that I think goes against that neuroaesthetics principle that you're really wanting to do well in your homes because again, I don't think metal really lends itself to people feeling great when it's in their space. But that was all I could think of, but when you told me you were sort of building your own cabinet boxes with the blocks, I was like, "Oh, duh." And yes, this has been done before. It's an older way of doing it, but, a lot of the things that we used to do in our homes turns out were a lot healthier, and it makes sense to go back to them.
Yeah, our housing stock, and it's a little different in Europe and different parts of the world, but our housing stock in North America is designed to last 25 to 49 years, according to our government. And the decomposition of that is always has health impacts. So because of that, everything's been built around that perspective, including our mortgage rates, and we can get into a whole financial system of that. But that, huge tangent.
Yes. I'm very
There's-
interested in that too, but yeah, for another day,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah. But the 25 to 49 years with the gives you different solutions when you approach the world from that perspective. When you approach something like the First Nations do, where I am, they're looking seventh generation. So what's the best decision I can make for, I forget how many grandkids it is, how many generations that, how many hundreds of years that is, but
Yeah.
their decision making is different. And when you're looking at these buildings where this was done thousands of years ago, these cabinet solutions that Shannon's talking about, these are buildings that lasted hundreds, sometimes 1,000 years, and there's still examples of those today.
Yeah.
And those solutions have stood the test of time and created healthy living environments for people to this day. So what we're suggesting is a much more proven system with not just decades of experience, but hundreds of years of data showing how that works compared to what we're used to in North America, which is actually, there's also decades, hundreds of years, or at least decades of data showing how each system works. It's just that it doesn't work well.
Yeah.
It's just that it works in a way that we need to change.
Yep. I agree. 1,000%. In terms of the roof, can you talk about what you're doing in that regard for mold prevention and keeping that system healthy as well?
Yeah. So there's few issues with roofs today, and almost all of them have organics in the envelope, which is in a roof, that should be a complete non-starter. You don't know that that's an issue. I have a client here locally who someone else did the build, but they're client for decades. And I went and inspected their home and the roof had leaked. There was no evidence. This was 2 years ago. The water had run down into a wall cavity. And then how they noticed was the drywall had started to crack.
Mhm.
And that was an ant infestation that had created enough pressure that it had pushed out the drywall and cracked. When I opened it up, I pinched a 2x4 and there was no resistance.
Wow.
The structure was completely run. The completely, like there was Nothing there. So this moldy environment from their roof down their wall into the foundation, there was no evidence that they would have found even with a house inspection.
Yep. So
And
common.
that's what we currently have. So what we want to do is create places that don't have these chases. First, there needs to be no organics in the envelope. The second one is you can't have a chase where things are hidden.
Mm-hmm.
If water is getting in, you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same. And I know I will get back to roof, but it's the same with our plumbing. All our plumbing's exposed. If there's an issue with your plumbing, you need to know. You can't have that hidden. We'll make it aesthetically acceptable. Uh, but it needs to be a solution that that is known because the impacts are disastrous.
Yes.
So in a roof, we have structure, and the structure can either go inside or outside of the envelope. Because we have a wall that you described earlier, which is mass, insulation, mass, either of those mass pieces can be the structural component.
Mm-hmm.
So your structure from your roof can come and rest on the outside wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then your insulation can be continuous and rest on the inside wall.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, they're distinct. You're not trying to tie your structure in the same as your insulation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one solution. The other solution is you have your structure inside the insulation and your insulation coming and connect to the insulation of the wall. And then you have a finish like standing steel metal. So the look is the same as what you're used to, but that standing seam runs over the walls and your structure is all inside that envelope resting on the inner wide. So there's a few solutions how that can work, but the more important piece is the approach rather than the specific of you do this and you do this and you do this. There's different ways to have that impact, and it can be done with concrete, it can be done with steel. But what I really would want to convey is that the structure and your insulation and your vapor barrier are not in the same plane.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I get technical sometimes, so please, if you want me to simplify something, please.
Yeah.
I'm trying to use
Well,
standard.
I'm still learning building science and the terminology. So let me see if I gleaned what I was supposed to glean from that. So it sounded like you were contrasting a conditioned attic space with insulation versus an unconditioned attic space with insulation. You were talking about those two different ways of building roofs. Is that correct?
I'm talking about in our system, we would have a steel structure with insulation right on top of it. So that,
Okay.
or a concrete structure with insulation right on top of it. So that your structure is not your structure and then attic and then the insulation.
Hmm.
It's your structure with insulation on it.
Okay. Yep.
Or you have your insulation with your structure on it. Either way, there's not a gap.
Hmm.
There needs to be venting so that water can drain out
Hmm.
for condensation. But either one works as long as if this is your insulation, as long as your structure in a typical building, you have your insulation and then you have your your wood coming in and intersecting that, and then you have insulation on the other side, then you have wood, and then
Yes.
you put a vapor barrier over top of that, and as soon as that fails, your wood rots out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's built to fail.
Hmm.
And we say, oh, if everything goes well, this roof has a 25 or 30-year lifespan. That's not good.
No.
That's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
If there's a failure before that or something in the installation process, then you have an unknown problem, undiagnosed problem where you're having failure that is, especially for this clientele, for these people.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, it's failure.
Yeah. So you guys are going all inorganic material with your roofing systems as well.
Yeah, yeah. Roof, floor, walls. Once you get inside, we can be flexible.
Hmm.
But for those three components, it's called the building envelope. But for those three components, we need to be very strict.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Excellent. The roof, at least for me in doing my own research, has been the hardest part to figure out. So It's good to hear what you guys are doing with it, and I may have to ask you more details about that down the line because I'm still not
Yeah.
sure the way I'm going with my own roof is the right way to go. But I don't see anyone else, even people doing a variety of different styles of things they're calling healthy homes, doing fully inorganic roofs. I'm just not seeing anyone doing that. So I love that you guys have figured that out.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Shannon?
I say this is where, we also chase down a number of things. Like roof has been a topic for us for quite a number of years. And to some degree, we're almost starting to look at commercial systems and how they do it and bring that to residential, is really, and simplifying that to a residential application. Um, and so we've gotten really complex with our ideas of how to do it. And at the end of the day, we ended at what is turning out to be a pretty simple application, but it took a lot of round robin to figure it out and come to.
I believe it because that's what I've been going through myself in trying to figure it out. So very cool. All right. So let's talk about some of the things that you guys are doing that will minimize. I mean, I already know from some of the things you've already described, you're severely minimizing VOCs and chemicals in the home. But is there anything else that you guys want to talk about, or do you want to talk about how the things we've already discussed are limiting chemicals in the home?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just another analysis, and that kind of lands in my interior world quite a bit, which I've fortunately been able to put together a database over the years of, anytime something newer, better comes out, it just gets added to my, backlog of knowledge of what's available. But like I said earlier, it's really a lot of it is just understanding what are the problem chemicals.
Mhm.
Be, eliminating those and not even using materials as much as possible that have that. I will say the industry is getting a lot better. I actually found a stone company the other day that is silica free, which is really exciting because even a lot of porcelains have silica, which isn't necessarily off gassing, but going into more of the periphery of people who are working with it, that still causes cancer and it can cause rashes and it can do a lot while you're actually working with it. And so to some degree too, it's how is the product manufactured and also how does it perform over time in the building.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets a little interesting with organics because then if I'm going to take it to furniture for a second, if we look at, organic cushioning and things like that, or, our best kind of fabrics, healthiest organic fabrics, those do have a shorter lifespan. And so then you're in this equation of having to replace or some organic materials don't like eliminate stains and things like that as much. And so that just adds to dirt and grime and buildup of, mold can grow inside an interior cushion, even though we're organic. So this is kind of where it gets into the equation of really understanding who we're building for and tailoring the interior environment for whomever it is, because people, again, do have different levels of sensitivities and might care about one pathway more than another. So we're just having that database to pull from and really understanding who is sitting in front of us and helping them make the correct decisions for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point because I agree. I am very mold sensitive, but I am not chemically sensitive. And at this point, I'm minimally EMF sensitive. And so for me, all of my decisions need to be the best that they can be in terms of mold prevention, but I don't necessarily need the absolute best in terms of chemical prevention. And like you're saying, sometimes those things can be a little bit at odds. And
Mhm.
so you can choose your priority if you know who you're building for. And I love that.
Yeah, and it'd be just kind of provide a table and a matrix, though some people don't even know that they have those priority options, right? And so we outline the pros and the cons of these different pathways and have those light bulb moments of, oh, actually, this is the pathway I need, and I didn't even know. So, yeah, we enjoy bringing new information to light and making sure that people feel confident in their decisions.
Beautiful. Yeah. Anything you want to say on that front, Joss, on the chemicals?
Yeah, I'll take a step back, and just the world that we live in is very complex. Plastics haven't been around that long.
Mm.
We started creating them, and we haven't tracked those health issues we're learning as these products are getting developed. So that's a whole conversation in its own. But the world that we live in, you have a lot of plastics and you have a lot of wood that's trying to act like plastic or has been plasticized.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult for someone who is reacting to their environment to find a solution that works for them. So Shannon's developed this database, which is a huge resource. And I always look at it more from how do we simplify? How do we remove everything from the environment and bring in very few things that are safe? And we've had a lot of experience with this with our multiple chemical sensitivity patients, where everything that we would bring into a home, we'd have the home be empty first, and we'd bring in one thing at a time and have it sit with them. And maybe they sleep with it under their pillow, or we'd have our process where they could assess that and make sure it was safe for them before it got installed or before they're bringing it. And this is the same with clothing. This is everything around us in our world. So there is a level of care that I would strongly urge people to take, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed and for your system to get overwhelmed, and you can't even identify what's causing it at that point. You just know that you're reacting.
Yeah.
So we want to create a safe space. That one of the real challenges we have is how to monitor that safe space, how to maintain that safe space for someone once the building is built. So our firewalls don't emit VOCs. They're emitting negative ions. So you can measure, is it emitting negative ions, is it emitting positive ions, and then you can look at VOC emission. And there's an architect, a colleague that we work with. He's not a practicing architect anymore. He was a French Canadian who came and trained with Firewall, and he moved to China because China was where all the best innovation. It was all. What he says is everything that's the best in the world happens in China. Everything that's the worst in the world happens in China.
That makes sense to me. Yes.
So, but it gave him the opportunity to design homes and office buildings and where he was maintaining indoor air quality. And he built the first buildings where your indoor air quality was better than the outdoor air quality.
Wow.
He designed those buildings, but at first he was failing every time, and he'd design it, and the structure would be sourable or concrete or something that wasn't off-gassing, and he'd be very careful about what was in the concrete and what sealers, or that's a big one. But he'd design the home, and then they'd bring in their office chairs, and the whole thing would skyrocket off the charts, and they'd bring in all of these issues, and he was failing. So what he does now is he's created a system that's used. He has the only system that's tracking health inside the environment in real time. It's called Reset. It's only on commercial and institutional buildings right now. There's some issues from a EMF perspective. It's all smart technology, but he has real life data on every building that he has installed, and so that tracking, they didn't even have the data that could track these things to the level that he needed to track them to. So they developed the data loggers.
Wow.
And then all those systems have been getting developed. But for the public, what I want them to take away from that is his approach that worked for him was he got to the point where I have to remove everything. I have to get to where I'm building with steel, rammed earth, glass. That's where he got to. And he's like, everything else, I don't like, it's off gassing. It's, and then I can start bringing in and testing these pieces, once I'm in this safe environment. And that's what I would encourage people to do, is create a safe environment. And I'm obviously very biased towards our systems that we've developed, but whatever that safe environment is, create that environment and then add things to it very carefully.
Yeah. If you don't have a data logger that has, this incredible testing capacity for all the chemicals, then you need to use your body, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And these
And
people are
that's
canaries in the coal mine, so it's very easy to use your body actually and find out if something is safe for you when you're that
yeah,
sensitive. So I think that's
yeah, but
noble.
you have to do it in very small steps.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about some EMF precautions that you're taking in these builds that will help the really EMF sensitive folks to be able to tolerate them too.
Sure. So we first worked with a biobiologist in, I'm gonna say 2002, something like that. And a biobiologist is it's a German term, but it's someone who's measuring the invisible world. So they're measuring high frequency, low frequency, microwave pollution, uh, positive ion, negative ion. They have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of instruments that are measuring the invisible world, and that's their whole world.
Mhm.
Uh, if you're really sensitive to EMFs, you need a biobiologist. You need someone who is measuring, and if you already have an existing home, you want to be measuring that existing home. If you're looking at buying a property, you want to measure that property before you buy the property, or if you've bought it, you want to measure it and sell it if it doesn't perform, because there are things that you can't change. We had a client, his wife had mold illness, didn't know what hers was yet. I'm sure it is that, but wasn't diagnosed as that. And high EMF sensitivity. And they had a biobiologist, they had a mountain lot. We were the designer and the builder on the project. Uh, they brought a biobiologist over. We didn't even know what that was at the time. This was 2001, 2002, something like that. And started measuring their lot. And they measured on the top of the hill. And it was way, way higher than what would be acceptable in all of Europe. And way beyond. So they ended up going around with her and finding the lowest spot on the property that they were willing to accept and building a Cyril home in that location. And then we did testing after it was built, and that EMF pollution was reduced by 50% inside the home. So there are some negatives to that. For our cell reception gets worse.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. There are, uh, and if you're not EMF sensitive, there's ways to boost that where you don't deal with it, but you're increasing your EMF. So for those that are EMF sensitive, that's a strong positive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely is. Yeah, I'm imagining that the wall system I'm going to use does that too. And I've been in like concrete office buildings. One of my practice locations was in a concrete office building and it mitigated EMFs beautifully. It was wonderful because it was in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made it hard to make cell phone calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, component that I've been really focused on, and we're unsure if we're gonna include it in our models. It might kind of price us out of where exactly we want to be for this specific community in this first model set, but it will be an option. But I've been really looking at the Lutron lighting system for multiple reasons. A, because they are just leading the way in setting lighting tones and patterns for circadian rhythms, but also have their systems where it does mitigate EMFs because it's almost like a honeycomb system. So one top student and top student and top student another, which then you're mitigating the level out of RMX and cabling you need back to the main home run, which by the way, we're going to have kill switches so everything can be shut off at night or whenever. And also our main connections are going to be outside of the building structure. So probably just like on a post or a wall that will have some of our kind of main electrical systems outside of the structure. But that Lutron system is really great and it mitigates a lot because there's just not as much need for all of the electrical outlets that you would typically have.
That's really cool. I hadn't heard about that yet.
You can move your washer, your dryer, your main panel, everything that's a big culprit to rising EMFs into a building that's still insulated and attached. You don't have to go outside to get there, but you have that in what I would call a sacrificial building, which means 25 to 49 years. I'd still build it with, I wouldn't build it with stick frame, but you have it with a lightweight building material, so that it isn't containing those EMFs. Those are transparent. You get those fields go outside,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have your high mass envelope inside of that so that you have a barrier from your culprits to your living situation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm also gonna put my main electric panel in a separate building. I love it. So I'm assuming you're gonna be doing shielded electric cables and Ethernet in the houses too.
So if you can see behind it, is there video on this? Yeah. So there's a plug here behind me under my staircase. And when you take your reader, you're measuring the electromagnetic field, you can read it at that plug. But it's going back 8 inches and to the insulation and then vertically up through a conduit. And if you try to measure the electromagnetic field and where that conduit is, you can't even track it. So
Oh,
the wall is already providing that shielding.
oh, I love that. Oh, that's a
So
huge benefit to the 2 layers of mass.
it's massive. So, and then what your conversation becomes is, where do I want my plugs? Where do I want my outlets? Where I'm bringing that field to the face. And
Mhm.
you don't want it directly behind your head on your bed. You don't want it directly behind your head on the couch. You want it by your feet or up high.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Just like small details too, like three-way switches are more emitting than single way. And so do you have a need for those three ways for safety at night or whatever it might be, but you just want to try to mitigate be really thoughtful and mindful about how you're designing your entire data electric plan.
Mhm. Well, it sounds
And
like you guys have thought that through really well.
a typical building is wired where you go from plug up to light switch through the studs to another to plug down to another plug, and you end up wrapping yourself many, many times in electrical wire.
Mhm.
And it goes over a door frame, across and down the other side, and then over to another switch.
Mhm.
And what you've got is horizontal banding. What we want to do, especially for someone who's sensitive with EMFs, we do it on all our builds, but especially, is you take a plug like this, you go back to your insulation, and you go run up to the roof. So all your electrical is that banding, which you always have to make it back to the panel. You can't stop going horizontal at some point, but let's not do it around our bodies. Let's not do it around our head. Let's do it up, out of our space. The field decreases very quickly as you move away from a wire. So
Yeah.
you get it out of your space, run it back to the home run it back to the electrical panel, and you release. Solved might be too far, but you know solved.
Mitigated it
There's
a lot.
yeah,
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 dramatically. Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. Very cool. So I asked Shannon this the other day, and I thought it was one of the other beautiful things about what you guys are doing, which is that you're planning to actually do post testing in your homes and really amass this proof, this data set for people so that when they go into building a healthy home with you in the future, they actually know they have proof from prior builds that what you guys are doing is actually keeping VOCs and EMFs low and preventing mold and all of that kind of stuff. So, can you talk about what you're planning to do for testing on your builds?
Yeah, and we have a lot of that data that I've been referencing on this already, like the EMFs and like the parts per million or indoor air quality or uh, humidity control. Those
Yeah.
are tests that we have.
Okay.
But we want these buildings that we're designing and that we're presenting as the ideal option for the service community. We want to be tracking those and continuing to refine and improve them and understand to an even higher degree how we can improve
Mhm.
uh, and make that as much of a sanctuary for these people as we can.
Yeah.
And so that to me is it's essential. Something like 1% of architects go back and view their buildings after they're built. That's a huge failure in our world. We need to understand and not just, I mean, we have a lot of testimonials from our clients where they say their experience, and that's extremely valuable, but we also want to be able to put data into it and have hard numbers where we have, here's how that was tracked.
Mhm.
And this was the result.
Yeah. And I think that's especially important when it comes to building mold preventative homes and doing mold testing to prove that they are not developing major issues over time. Of course, it's possible that any home could do that, but we have tons and tons of data on stick-built homes saying that with time, they all fail, basically. But what we don't have is tons and tons of data saying these alternative ways of building are not going to fail you over time. And so I'm really excited for all of us who are interested in building homes for mold prevention to acquire and amass that data over time. Because one of the first things that was said to me when I announced into some of the Facebook groups that are related to mold illness and building healthy homes, I was saying, hey, I'm going to build a mold resistant home and I'm going to share my journey. People were like, well, how do you know it's going to be mold resistant? Do you have a bunch of test results over a long period of time showing that it is? And I was like, no, I don't have that. It's a good point, but I want to collect it. And so I'm stoked that you guys are interested in doing that too.
Yeah, and I want to require it in all our homes. I don't know whether that's going to be a barrier for people from a privacy perspective, but my goal would be that this is every home we're collecting data, and it's a huge uh, advantage to those that are living in it, because if anything were to ever go wrong, we would see the humidity start to climb, and you would be able to address the issue before it became a problem.
Yeah.
And so those, or if your VOCs start to go off the chart, or your parts per million, or whatever it is, if you have an indicator and you're able to track that, that should be a huge advantage to the inhabitants.
Yeah.
So that's my strong hope.
I would say we're not even interested in it. Like, that's an absolute must and non-negotiable. And a lot of the baseline that honestly our company kind of stands on, like this, that we are doing this. Magis exists as a solution, and there is no solution without assurances. And so,
Yeah.
And it also allows you to highlight, because we're all people and we're all bringing in our own things, and our families bringing in our own things. And
Yeah.
if you have pets, that can be a big culprit. But uh, there's all these things that we have in our world. And it would be great for people to know, okay, something changed 2 weeks ago, and all of a sudden my place is less healthy, and I can identify it happened on the 14th of March.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened? And you can start to go through and solve the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think this kind of gets into like our larger mission too of, we're starting here with SIRS, but we kind of talked a little bit about the approach generally speaking, but our Magis approach is just really looking at the entire way we design homes and live in homes differently, and away from this kind of post-industrialization that we got just stuck in, and going back to how things used to be, like we were kind of talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it's changing the building mindset first, and then changing the way we operate in the buildings. And so these data points, as Joss just outlined, is it really starts to kind of change the thinking of how we are living and operating.
It 1,000% does. And I think it will change the industry, because I think it's not just the consumer that's sick that needs that data. It's also builders and architects who are resistant to change. They need to see that data to make the leap.
Well, and even people who, there's a huge amount of people who are passionate about their wellness, and they don't, there's no metrics, there's no way for them to understand that. They might practice yoga, they might eat organic food. They know what to do in certain levels. They know that they need to keep their body active, their mind active,
Yeah.
ingest good nutrients. But we as an industry aren't providing them with resources to be able to track that in the home.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's very exciting. I can't wait for that data to come out. And if there is a funding issue with it, I think we should figure out how to get that funding.
I mean, that's our barrier.
Yeah.
Is, we have the team in place. We've been putting this together, customized for the service community over the last couple of years, and now we're ready to produce. And we can produce them on one-offs, and that'll take time, or we have the ability to produce them at a much higher scale. And I'd love to do it that way. Either way, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
But the bigger impact that we can have without sacrificing quality, the sooner, that's the goal.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the logistical things people might want to know if they want to work with you. Like, where are you going to be building these homes? Can you build them wherever people are, or only certain states? Or tell us a little bit about that.
We can build them. If you start going overseas, we're less there's more for
Okay.
us to figure out would be the
Yeah.
way to put it. Within North America, we have people that are willing to travel and build these homes. We have a lot of people who want to make this happen, and we can work with local trades that are overseen to
Mhm.
make sure they're done according to our standards. So we're going to provide the service throughout North America is the answer.
Right. And I think what we're in 5 different states at least. Maybe. Yeah.
Sounds right. I
Okay,
don't have it
good.
off the top of my head, but yeah.
So, and that's just like kind of the one-ups, either people looking at our models or doing custom homes with us. And then, what Joss was saying, the bigger impact, we've looked at a couple of different areas for development. Nothing fully lined up quite yet, the funding gap that we have. But yeah, we definitely would be looking at doing some larger developments in a few kind of key areas.
Yep, absolutely. So, I meant to ask this earlier, but part of the point of why you guys have this team of people put together is you're really wanting to help people from the very beginning through all the way to completion through all these different steps so that they don't have to put together their own team, right? Can you talk about that? What the process is for somebody that builds with you?
Yeah, it's the only way that I know how to assure the result.
Yeah.
So that if we're just doing the design work, how do we make sure that it's built properly? How do we address the questions that come up during construction?
Mm.
If we're only doing the construction or working with outside designers, there's going to be things that aren't designed how they need to be designed to be optimal for health. So it's really out of necessity that we're doing it that way because we already have a lot of examples the other way. We've been building Firewall since the early 90s. There's lots of buildings that are designed by architects that are awesome buildings that improve human health, but they're not the best we can do.
Mhm.
And that's what we're looking to do. So how that works is there's two main avenues. One is we have model homes, which are off the shelf, uh, ready to go. So if someone is looking for how do I get into a safe place, we've spoken to a lot of the community, and one of the things you hear over and over is, I just need a safe space where I can heal. Like I can't even look at something longer term. I just need a solution today. And there's no solution. And some of these people have a lot of money
Yeah.
and some of them don't, but there's no solution either way. Um, so we've created model homes that are solutions that can be off the shelf selected, and we will go through your local building department. We are going to manage it throughout the whole process. So we're going through the local building department. We're managing the design through submittals. We're making the details fit that climate because there are details that need to be different in Florida than they do in Edmonton.
Yeah.
It's a completely different climate.
Yeah.
That and your humidity is different, and heating versus cooling,
Mhm.
it's different. So we customize the details. We manage it through design all the way through construction to when you move in. And there's minimal decisions in those models that people get to make.
Mhm.
And that's where they work with Shannon and AK. And it's what kind of finishes do you want here? And what do you want the look of this to look like?
Mhm.
But the structure is fixed.
Mhm.
That this is our off the shelf, ready to go option.
Mhm.
The second option, it's custom. So this is for the person who has more money or more time
Mhm.
and wants to design their still sanctuary, safe space, ideal for their health, but wants more control over the process and what they want that to look like.
Yeah. Totally. Custom building a house is definitely always more expensive and more time, both by a lot, than if you have, a pre-made floor plan, which is essentially what your model homes are, right?
We used to say in the early 2000s that there were over 1,000 decisions in a home, and that's only increased.
Yeah. Definitely
So,
feels like it to me now that I'm in the process. It's a lot.
yeah. And
Mhm.
that's how we would start our conversations with our clients as a design build was we need to create an approach for how you want to make these decisions uh, so that this is a good experience for you.
Yeah.
And and so that your decisions are being made the best for what your values are. Because throughout a process, a design process, you're in a different mindset every day. And some days, you've just talked to someone and your focus is on energy efficiency, but really energy efficiency isn't nearly as important to you as health is, for example. But you don't want to make a decision about one piece from an energy efficiency perspective while ignoring health. So we want to understand, what are your priorities and how do we make sure that those priorities get honored throughout the whole design?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to do, especially for like someone like you who's going through that process. You have to hold that and hold those priorities for yourself throughout the whole design build.
Yes, and amidst a team of varying players who have much less background on what I'm trying to achieve than you guys have, right? And so that makes it difficult because there's another added layer of communication with those people because they just don't know what they need to know, essentially. So I'm sort of becoming the teacher with some of my team, which is not ideal because I'm learning too.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and you have to.
Yeah.
And they all bring their own values. So you need to make sure that you're holding yours and not just trusting what they say. Because
Yeah.
a lot of them are trying to come at it from your best interests, and what they would do on their own home is often what they're asked.
Yeah.
But often what they would do on their own home is try to save a buck.
Right.
And you don't want to approach it as, I'm trying to save a buck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nope. Well, I love that you guys have the model homes because I think you're right that the majority of the people that have approached me since I've been doing this for myself is they've been saying, I need somewhere to live yesterday that's safe for me
Yeah.
because some of them are literally homeless in the meantime, like camping, because they just can't find any other safe space. And so that will dramatically speed up the process. So really the piece that they need to handle, and I'm guessing that you can help them with this, but they need to, select the land and then you guys will do all the permitting and everything after that.
And we'd love to be involved with that if it fits, because there are things with the land that you can't change after.
Yeah.
So it is something that has a big impact.
Yeah.
So that what that fits for is the people who have enough money to do custom home and enough money to buy their own land and build their own lower cost, but still building in this climate is very expensive, no matter what you're building. So
Yeah.
the other solution that we need is where that development project that Shannon was talking about comes in, and because that can provide a rental income for the investor, but a rental opportunity for the people who can't afford to buy their own land, build their own home,
Exactly.
and so that's
Exactly.
is really needed.
That's where I want to see it go to. And I hope that some of the nonprofit organizations in the space can help with that eventually. Especially once there really is a proven system and we have all this testing saying these homes are going to be healthy for these people, not just in the short term, but in the long term. I think that that will become a much easier sell to get funding for something like that. So I look forward to that day. So the last thing I want to ask is, well, not the last thing, but second to last is how long do you think it would take for somebody to get a home constructed? Let's say they already have the lot and it has utilities and they just need site grading and then they want to put one of your model homes on it.
Yeah.
So permit is the big variable,
Okay.
because that in some places that's a day, and in some places that's a year.
Okay.
And so there's some, that's one and that has nothing to do with that has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Aspen, for example, is actually more than a year. We had a
Wow.
job there where they're approving, forget the number, but it's something like 6. They have a limit where they're only improving 6 projects a year. I'm saying 6, it's probably wrong,
My
but a number, and it's single digits. And so you have years where you're trying to go through this permit process. So
yeah.
whereas somewhere like Dr. McMahon, who we're working with in Roswell, that's like, well, you submit the permit, we'll get it to you next day. Like, might be a couple days.
Yeah.
And I think that's too where Joss, says if we can, if people are willing to move or relocate, we can kind of help identify what is going to be a really clean, efficient path for them. The buildings themselves. So right now we have 2 models. We're developing a third, kind of a steep, but There's one that's just shy of 1,000 square feet, and then we have a 1,700 square feet. The one that's just shy of 1,000, I think over time we could honestly get to about a 4-month build time. Right now, we're about maybe 6 to 8 months for the first, set of however many,
Mhm.
on a pretty safe side.
Nice. Yeah. And do you want to share the numbers about how much those models cost approximately?
It's going to vary state to state, but we'll give our general numbers. And then if you're saying I'm trying to build in Seattle, then that's more,
Okay.
or New York. Whereas if you're saying, you know, a lot of the country, the costs are similar. So
Okay.
that disclaimer, and then I'll let Shannon go.
Okay.
We're in the mid to upper fives for those small unit. And I was going to chime in earlier, so this is a good time that, when Josh was talking about saving a buck and things like that, those are also a lot of what took us time to develop these model plans too, was we really looked at the costing too. We had, a number of people reach out to us, and we kind of came to this, 500, mid $500,000 level, because that was the majority of the feedback that we heard specifically from SIRS community. When we asked them budget, that was what we were given.
Yeah.
But we kind of took that information and worked backwards and said, okay, what's going to get us to that number, or to that, kind of mid five range? And that's the amount of square feet and kind of the program that developed out of what we were given. Again, there's people that can swing both ways from that, but we just started noticing that trend and that pattern. So that's kind of where the decision making to come up with those sizes came from. And our L units, which are the 1,700 square feet, those would likely be more in the mid to high sevens.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to just touch on this, and if you want to expand, Joss, but Ram dirt, yes, is a luxury material, or a little bit more costly to build. And we also encourage people to look at the maintenance over time, which is very low. And, you're eliminating where that itself seems like it's a little bit more costly, but you're also eliminating your tieback and your exterior materials and your, XYZ over time. So we also look at the offsets of not only just in the building envelope, but even some of those interior solutions as well, and the ongoing maintenance and what it's going to cost somebody to actually care for the home over time as well.
Yeah, that can be a huge expense, having owned a few, I know. So, that's a really good point. But I think those are really reasonable numbers, especially that because you're making these choices to make them healthier. And so those are 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and 2-bedroom, 2 bath?
The larger is 3 bed, 2 bath, and then what we're working on now is kind of right in the middle, about a 1,200 square foot 2 bed, 2 bath with, a little extra space somewhere in there.
Nice. Okay, great. I love it. That will accommodate a lot of families, so I think that's great. So, how can people connect with you and Magis Homes if they want to learn more about what you're doing, and if they might want to do this for themselves?
Our main website is magisdevelopments.com. So there's a form on our website, of course. That's usually me who responds to that. But so I'm just Shannon at magis.health, and we kind of take it from there. I mean, any of us can be reached, and we kind of have different lanes that we pop in at different points in time along the process. And, some of us are expert in different questioning and things like that.
Okay.
We're all first name at magis.health. So Shannon at magis.health, Joss at magis.health, Michael at magis.health, and AK at magis.health.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your time and the details about this amazing project that you started to help people get into homes like this in a very accessible way. I think this is the most accessible solution that I have found yet. And so thank you for coming on and sharing this with all of the people that are following me. And I hope that it helps a lot of people.
Thank you so
You
much.
too.